The other day, a young person asked me, "Why do you always wear black?" Without thinking, I responded, "I'm in mourning for my lost youth." That's not why I wear black. I wear black because black is my uniform. I wake up in the morning and I don't think to myself, "What should I wear today?" I pull on a pair of black Levi's, put on a black t shirt, and I'm good to go. Of course, I can't dress like this every day. The dictates of my profession demand that sometimes I have to look a little more respectable. But more and more people are thinking less and less about what they wear these days. COVID has ensured that many of us are working at home, and it doesn't matter if we wear a suit jacket up top and sweatpants down below. Well, our clothes dictate, to a certain extent, who we are, and they dictate our reality. A surgeon once commented that when he puts on his surgical gown, his mask, his cap, and he prepares to do surgery on a human body, he is a doctor, whether he feels like it or not. Those clothes ensure to him not just hygienic and surgical purposes, but they dictate his role in our society. Maybe you've had a dream where you walk into your high school gym wearing nothing. Maybe you've gone to a really nice soiree dressed down, or maybe to a party where you were too well dressed. Our clothes define our reality. They take the form of who we are and who we want to be. In our society, perhaps an African American man wearing a suit looks at a white man wearing ripped blue jeans and says, "I could never afford to dress like that." He's not speaking economically, he's echoing the realities of being an African American man in a dominant society. The fact that I can wear black jeans and a black t-shirt is my profession shows the ease with which I find myself as a white person in the dominant society. Well, most people get dressed up at least one time in their lives, and it's usually at weddings, theirs or someone else's. And that's kind of our story for today from St. Matthew's Gospel. It's about a king who has a son and wants to invite people to his son's wedding. Well, it's a big party, so you, of course, would think that all the rich and famous, all the shakers and movers of society will want to come, but they don't. The king's servants send out the invitations, and no one wants to come. They blow them off. Well, even in this story, they kill some of the king's servants. Now look, I hate going to wedding receptions as much as the next guy, but killing someone over a wedding invite is going a little too far. So the king tells his servants, "Go out into the alleys, go out on the other side of the tracks, go to the places where well-heeled people don't find themselves, and you invite those kind of people to come to my son's wedding." The king does that, and when the people come, it's a great party. End of story, right? That's a good story about inclusion and about welcoming the stranger and about being friend to homeless people, right? Except that's not where the story ends. You see, one of the guests doesn't have wedding clothes on. He's wearing the wrong kind of clothes. Well, of course he's wearing the wrong kind of clothes. He was sleeping next to a dumpster a few hours ago. He comes to the wedding, and the king looks at him and says, "Out of here. You don't belong." Do you think this story is really about clothes? Nah, I don't think so. I think it's about what's on the inside, not what's on the outside. Years ago, when baseball was being integrated, Jackie Robinson played for the Brooklyn Dodgers. And when they went on the road, one of the first places they went was to my hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio. There was an old baseball field there called Crosley Field. It was a mess, let me tell you. It was just a ramshackle stadium. And when they called Jackie Robinson's name, he ran out on the field, and what he heard were boos and catcalls and racial epithets hurled at him. You see, Cincinnati didn't give Robinson a very good welcome. The Klan threatened him. Hotels wouldn't let him sleep in their environments. Even some of his own teammates refused to speak to him. So Robinson ran out on the field and he just received a barrage of hate. And then they called the name of the shortstop, a Kentucky kid called Pee Wee Reese. And he ran out on the field to cheers. And he stood next to Jackie and he engaged the African American man in conversation. And while they were talking, you know what he did? He just kind of casually put his arm around Jackie's shoulder. And Jackie said that genuine gesture, that gift from the heart, that most meaningful move meant all the world to him. It meant whether he stayed and had a future in baseball or not. You see, it wasn't the Brooklyn Dodgers uniform that mattered. It was what was in the heart of a good man. What's in our hearts, what's in our souls, as we used to say, really matters. There's a story of a Polish freedom fighter named Jan Karski. Very few people heard of Karski. They've heard of Elie Wiesel, who wrote great stories, unfortunately, about the Holocaust. But Karski was the first man to write a book about what was happening to the Jewish people. He wrote it even before the war was over in 1944. You see, he was a freedom fighter in Poland, and they sent him behind the enemy lines to determine what was happening in the Nazi concentration camps. And Karski came out and he told the awful story. He went to President Roosevelt and he laid out what was happening. Roosevelt didn't even respond with a word. He went to one of the Supreme Court justices and told him what was happening. The justice called him a liar. He traveled throughout the United States and Britain telling the story, but very few people believed him. Very few people listened to him. Very few people cared. And Karski, after the war, was relegated to oblivion. He was an academic. For 40 years he did his work. And finally in the 80s, he came out again to tell his story. And people said, why now? Why after 40 years tell this story that by now the world has accepted? And Karski said he did it for two reasons. The first reason was that a whole generation was growing up without learning of the Holocaust of the Jewish people. And secondly, he said, I believe in a final judgment. I believe that God will say to me one day, Karski, I gave you your life, but your life is over. And I gave you your soul. What have you done with your soul? And Yarn Karski said, I will have to answer that. My friends, life is like a wedding party that all of us have been invited to. Well, we might not always wear the right clothes, but what really matters is how we treat the people on the margins of society. Whether we're willing to embrace those who are least valued in our world, whether we think money is more important than righteousness, whether we love war more than we love peace. Those are the clothes that really matter. There's a dress code in life. Thank goodness it's not a black t-shirt and black Levi's. There's a dress code. It's what's inside of our hearts, because all of us want to be welcomed to the biggest wedding party of all.